Welcome to this session on literary criticism. Aristotle opened his school in Athens. His school of rhetoric and philosophy was called the Lyceum. Lyceum was dedicated to Apollo Lyceus, the god of shepherds. There was a large library, a natural history museum, and a zoological garden in Lyceum. Most of the students at Lyceum were from the middle class. In Lyceum, prominence was given to the learning of natural sciences, including botany, zoology, medicine, and mathematics, music, constitution of Greek cities, and customs of barbarians. Let us now try to understand Aristotle's concept of substance. He has discussed the concept of substance in metaphysics and categories. Aristotle states that the subject matter of metaphysics is existence, what it means for things to exist. Aristotle basically holds that there are different categories through which we can view the world. Whatness, quality, relation, place, time, position, state, action, and affection. He has also brought forth two terms, namely primary substance and secondary substance. Primary substance is that which is neither asserted nor can be found in a subject. An example of primary substance is a horse. And let's see what is secondary substance. Secondary substance designates the species under which these individual entities are classified. So, the species itself would fall under the genus of animal. I hope you can understand the difference between primary substance and secondary substance by looking at the example given. A horse is a primary substance and it belongs to the genus animal. So, horse is an example of primary substance and the genus animal is an example of secondary substance. So, Aristotle has tried to explain this phenomena of existence through his works, categories, and metaphysics. Now, let us see the difference between the concepts raised by Plato and that of Aristotle. Plato's ideal republic is utilitarian. Aristotle's state was directed towards the highest good. It tried to enable men to live the good life. And Plato tried to emphasize on the use value of things. Secondly, their concept about imitation. Imitation is an imperfect copy of the form according to Plato, whereas imitation is a mode of learning associated with pleasure in Aristotle's point of view. Plato views reality as above and beyond our world, while Aristotle tried to find reality within our world. So these are three key ideas which you should keep in mind. The difference of opinion between Plato and Aristotle with regard to the ideal state or the ideal republic, then with regard to imitation and their perspective about reality. Aristotle viewed logic as an instrument which was a preliminary requirement for the study of every branch of knowledge. His own name for logic was analytics. He formalized the rules and methods of logic and treated it as a systematic prelude to scientific thinking. The basis of Aristotelian logic, which acted as the foundation of logic for over 2000 years, was the syllogism. Various logical treatises by Aristotle include categories, interpretation prior analytics, posterior analytics, and topics. The collective name given to these treatises is organon. Let us now see an example of syllogism. The Aristotelian syllogism typically consists of a major premise, a minor premise, and an inferred conclusion. See the classical example. All men are mortal. It is a major premise. Socrates is a man, a minor premise. Therefore, Socrates is mortal, and this is the inferred conclusion. I hope by now you have understood what is meant by syllogism. It simply means logic, and it is Aristotle who formulated the rules and methods of it, and the collective name given to the treatises is organon. Aristotle explains the contrast between poetry and history in his work The Poetics. Poetry is not obliged to express actual events, whereas history is obliged to express actual events. Poetry is philosophical and serious, and history is not as philosophical as poetry. Poets tried to express the universal. History deals with the particular. Poetry imitates a single action that is whole and complete. History is but concerned with actions of a period of time, which means a sequence of events. In contrast to Plato's observations, Aristotle invests imitation with a positive significance. He sees it as a basic human instinct. Imitation is an avenue towards truth and knowledge. He believes that human beings learn by way of imitation. Thus, imitation is a mode of learning associated with pleasure. All imitative arts such as drawing, sculpture, and poetry are pleasurable. And he highlights the fact that the process of imitation itself is pleasurable. So in total, he had a very positive perspective about imitation. Aristotle asserts that imitations can differ in three ways. 1. The means used for imitation. It can include color, shape, sound, rhythm, speech, and harmony. The second way in which artistic imitations differ from one another is in the kinds of objects they address, which is basically men involved in action. And thirdly, the manner of presentation. It can be either narration or dramatic presentation. So these are the three ways by which imitative arts differ from each other. In his works Poetics and Politics, Aristotle attempts to evaluate the merits of contemplation and action. It's clear that he places a high priority on action. He states that virtue in itself is not enough. There must also be the power to translate it into action. So action may be physical, mental, communal, or individual. Anyhow, it should have a moral end or purpose. Art imitates human action, but human action must have at its ultimate purpose the supreme God. So this is Aristotle's view on action. Aristotle's text Poetics gives us an analysis of tragedy. On the slide you can see the famous definition of tragedy as seen in Poetics. Tragedy is then an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude, by means of language enriched with all kinds of ornament, each used separately in the different parts of the play. It represents men in action and does not use narrative, and through pity and fear it affects catharsis to these and similar emotions. So we can understand that tragedy, a dramatic form, it is basically an imitation of an action. So this action should be a serious one, a complete one, and of a certain magnitude. And then he says about the means of imitation, and then he mentions about the dramatic mode of representation, and he mentions about the twin emotions of pity and fear, and again about the therapeutic effect, that is catharsis. We'll be dealing with them one by one in detail. And let us now see what is given below. The components of a tragedy: plot, character, diction, thought, spectacle, and song. The notion of action is central to Aristotle's view of tragedy because it underlies the other components and features, which include plot, character, diction, thought, spectacle, and song. These elements include the means of imitation. So, diction and song are the means of imitation. The manner of imitation, that is spectacle, and the objects of imitation, that is actions as arranged in a plot, the character and thought of the actors. Aristotle calls plot the first principle of tragedy, the soul of tragedy. According to him, plot is the unifying factor in tragedy. Aristotle divides the formal structure of the plot into prologue, episode, exode, parode, and stasimon. It's clear that for him the real structure of the plot is in the movement of the action. He divides plots into simple plots, which exhibit a continuous action, and complex plots, as exemplified in Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. How is or organic unity achieved. Aristotle says that the events in a plot must be connected with each other by the rule of probability or necessity. In section 7 of the Poetics, he discusses in detail the structure of the plot. He repeats that tragedy represents an action that is whole and complete. By using the word whole, he meant that it should have a proper beginning, middle, and an end. So this is what Aristotle meant by organic unity of a plot. Now, let us have a look at the various concepts discussed by Aristotle. Catharsis, hamartia, Anagnorisis, Parapatria, and Proesis. Catharsis. The term catharsis has been translated as purification or purgation by different scholars. It means the mind of the spectator is cleansed after viewing a tragedy. So, a tragedy has a therapeutic effect on its spectators. When you watch a movie which has a tragic end, you might shed tears. You might feel sad about the plight of the hero or the heroine. So the excess of emotions which are there in your mind are ventilated through such an activity. Similarly, at the end of tragedy, twin emotions, namely pity and fear, are evoked in the audience. You feel sad for the person who is shown to be suffering, and you are scared to see the extent of their suffering. So the twin emotions of pity and fear are evoked by viewing a tragedy, and thus the audience is cured of the excess of these emotions and they get a cleansing effect. So the purpose of tragedy is to purify the emotions of audience by disciplining and refining it by removing the excess. Tragedy is thus an insight experience. Hamartia. It means tragic flaw. This term is derived from the field of archery. Its literal meaning is to miss the mark. In any tragedy, the hero would commit certain actions which drive the plot towards its tragic end. For example, the Shakespearean tragic heroes. They are otherwise noble characters, but they have some sort of an erroneous behavior, some sort of a flaw in their character, which ultimately leads them towards their own downfall. So this is what you mean by hamartia, an error in character, a flaw in the character of an ideal tragic hero. So let's take the example of King Lear or Hamlet or Othello. All these people are in fact noble, but they had some sort of a problem or an error in their character which ultimately led to their downfall. King Lear was so arrogant, and Hamlet, procrastination, Othello, jealousy, suspicion. So all these are examples of hamartia in tragic heroes. Hamartia is tragic flaw or an error in character which ultimately leads to the pathetic culmination of a hero. Next we have Parapatria and Anagnorisis. To understand this, you need to be familiar with the story of Oedipus Rex. I hope you are familiar with the Greek tragedian Sophocles, the Greek trio Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. I hope you are familiar with these names. Now let's take Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. So this character Oedipus unknowingly married his own mother, and he happened to kill his own father. So it happened without his knowledge, and later in his life he realizes that he killed his own father and he married his own mother, and thereafter the entire scene changes upside down. So there is a turning point in the plot where some sort of a realization of truth happens, where a recognition of a truth which was hitherto unknown to the hero, it happens. So this is what you mean by anagnorisis, a sudden discovery of a truth, or a realization or a recognition of a truth which was hitherto unknown to the protagonist. This is called anagnorisis. And followed by that, there is a reversal of fortune, like a change by which the action is going to the opposite direction. So this is peripetia. So once Oedipus comes to know about his errors, he regrets and he blinds himself, and then the story goes on like that. You may just surf in the net and get the story if you don't know. So this is what you mean by anagnorisis and peripetia. So all these constitute the structure of a tragic plot. Catharsis is there, hamartia is there, anagnorisis, peripetia, all these together constitute the formal structure of a plot in a tragedy. The next term is proiresis. Aristotle's comments on the portrayal of character in tragedy raise some problematic issues. He suggested that character must be good. Character is revealed either through dialogue or action. Aristotle is referring to moral choice here. The word he uses for that is proiresis. It can be translated as will or a moral choice, a deliberate choice of a given course of conduct. So every action arises from a moral choice. So it is through the choice that the character gets revealed. The emphasis is on the particular morally significant action than on the character. So proiresis is a term which Aristotle used with respect to character, and it means a moral choice or will by means of which the character is revealed. The Poetics is usually recognized as the most influential treatise in the history of literary criticism. There are several translations of Poetics, and I have given the details of the Latin translations on the slide, and you can also see the 3 different commentaries written by different people. So Poetics is a core text of literary criticism which gives us a detailed description about imitation, all imitative arts, tragedy, its components, and so on. Poetics exerted a considerable impact on the 17th century French dramatists, the 18th century neoclassical writers, Russian formalists, new critics, Chicago School of Critics, and so on. Even today, people are interested in re-examining the fundamental Aristotelian notions such as catharsis and hamartia. His distinctive treatment of genre has been the foundation of genre theory, and his notions of plot and narrative structure continue to underline narrative theories. Finally, his consideration of audience reaction as a crucial factor in the composition of tragedy invites much reader response criticism. So, Aristotle and his Poetics continues to enjoy a prominent position in literary criticism. Today, we have dealt with the second lesson from Module 1. We came across Aristotle, his academy named Lyceum, Aristotle's logic, which is popularly known as Syllogism, examples of Syllogism, major logical treatises written by Aristotle, collectively known as Organon, how Aristotle's views differ from that of Plato, especially their differing opinions about the concept of imitation and the concept of reality, how Aristotle distinguishes between poetry and history, and the concept of substance and primary substance and secondary substance and the concerned examples, and his axiomatic text Poetics dealing with tragedy, the famous definition of tragedy, the component elements of tragedy, how significant is the plot according to Aristotle, how does he divide plot into two categories, and the formal structure of a plot and the organic unity of plot, then other Aristotelian notions such as Catharsis, hamartia, Anagnorisis, Parapatria, Anagnorisis, and so on. I hope the session is clear to you. Thank you.